My parents suspended my schooling on Christmas Eve until I apologized to their golden boy, so I said, all right. By morning, my room was packed and my decision changed everything. I'm standing in my childhood bedroom on Christmas Eve, watching my father's face turn the color of old newspaper as he stares at his phone. My mother has her arm locked around my brother Cameron's shoulders while he mutters something about family reputation and damage control. The acceptance letter from Stanford University sits on my desk, right next to printed confirmations of my full scholarship, my new apartment lease in Palo Alto, and my research assistant position at a biotech firm. 24 hours ago, my parents threatened to cut off my college tuition unless I apologized to Cameron for exposing his academic fraud. I had simply smiled and said, all right. Now, as the automated emails begin sending to institutions across the country, my family is realizing they severely underestimated their supposedly compliant daughter. My name is Emma, and until 3 days ago, I worshipped the ground my brother walked on. At 26, Cameron had graduated summa cum laude from Johns Hopkins School of Medicine and was completing his residency at New York Presbyterian Hospital. Meanwhile, I was just another junior at Arizona State University, grinding through my molecular biology degree while my parents constantly reminded me I'd never measure up to their golden boy. The hierarchy in our household had been set in concrete since we were kids. Cameron got the praise, the private tutors, the unwavering conviction that he could do no wrong. I got whatever attention was left over and endless comparisons that made me feel like I was born inadequate. When Cameron won the Arizona State Science Fair in high school, our parents threw him a party at the Cheesecake Factory with 50 guests. When I placed second in the same competition 2 years later, they mentioned it briefly over Domino's Pizza. But everything shattered 3 nights before Christmas when I was working late in the ASU library, finishing my undergraduate thesis on enzyme catalysis mechanisms. I'd been researching for 8 months, developing insights into metabolic pathways that even my professors called groundbreaking. As I scrolled through recent medical journals to verify my work was original, my stomach dropped. There, published in the American Journal of Clinical Medicine under Cameron's name, was an entire section of my thesis. Word for word. Not similar concepts or parallel thinking, my exact sentences, my precise methodology, my original conclusions about cellular metabolism. The publication date was 7 months ago, meaning Cameron had somehow accessed my work before I'd even shown it to my advisor. My hands shaking, I dug deeper. The more I searched, the more horrified I became. Cameron's supposedly revolutionary research paper, the one that had landed him a prestigious fellowship, contained 4 full pages of my undergraduate work. The metabolic pathways I'd spent countless nights mapping were now credited to my brother, earning him professional recognition while I struggled in obscurity. I printed everything, my mind spinning as I realized the implications. If Cameron was stealing my current work, what else had he taken credit for? I remembered his sudden academic turnaround in high school. His mysterious ability to produce brilliant science projects despite spending most weekends playing Call of Duty. The next morning, I confronted Cameron privately in his childhood bedroom, now a shrine to his achievements. Medical journals, framed diplomas, and awards covered every surface. I laid the evidence on his bed, my voice steady despite my pounding heart. We need to talk about your American Journal of Clinical Medicine publication, I said, pointing to the highlighted sections. This is my work, Cameron. My thesis, my research, my exact words. Cameron glanced at the papers, then at me, and laughed. Actually laughed. Emma, you're being dramatic. Research builds on previous work all the time. Besides, nobody's going to believe you came up with this first. I'm the one with the Johns Hopkins degree and the medical career. I have timestamps on all my files, I continued, pulling out my laptop. Email drafts, document histories, everything proving I wrote this months before your publication date. You somehow accessed my university account and stole my work. His laugh faded, replaced by something colder. Look, little sister, you're clearly jealous of my success. It's pathetic, really. Maybe you should focus on your own mediocre achievements instead of trying to sabotage mine. And if you're thinking of making accusations, remember that I'm about to become a doctor while you're still struggling through state school. Who do you think people will believe? The casual cruelty in his voice hit me like a slap. This was my brother, the person I'd looked up to my entire life, dismissing not only my work but my worth as a human being. He leaned back in his chair, supremely confident. Besides, he added, If you cause problems for me, I'll just tell Mom and Dad you're having some kind of breakdown. They already think you're unstable compared to me. One word from me about your mental state, and they'll have you in therapy faster than you can say plagiarism." I stood there absorbing his words, feeling my worldview crumbling. The brother I'd admired was not only a fraud but willing to destroy me to protect his lies. The parents who raised me were so blinded by favoritism they'd believe his word over evidence. That evening, during our traditional Christmas Eve dinner with aunts, uncles, and grandparents at Morton's Steakhouse, I made my decision. Cameron was entertaining everyone with stories from his residency, basking in their admiration. My parents beamed with pride, occasionally glancing at me with expressions that clearly communicated disappointment in having such an unremarkable daughter. Cameron's research is being considered for publication in another prestigious journal, my mother announced to the table. The hospital administration says his work on metabolic pathways could revolutionize treatment protocols. Metabolic pathways. My work. My discoveries. My future. I cleared my throat and stood. Actually, I'd like to share something about Cameron's research. I'd prepared copies of all the evidence, organized professionally with highlighted comparisons and timestamps. Cameron's groundbreaking work on metabolic pathways is remarkable, because it's identical to my undergraduate thesis, which I wrote 7 months before his publication. The table fell silent. I distributed the evidence packages, watching as my family members examined the side-by-side comparisons. The similarities were undeniable, down to specific technical terminology that only I had developed. Cameron's face shifted through surprise, anger, and calculation before settling on wounded innocence. "I can't believe this," he said, his voice breaking slightly. "My own sister is so jealous of my success that she's fabricating evidence to destroy my career." Cameron turned to our parents, tears forming in his eyes. "I've been trying to help her, encouraging her to get counseling, but instead she's created this elaborate fiction where I somehow stole her work. It's heartbreaking to see Emma this delusional." My mother immediately moved to comfort Cameron, while my father's expression hardened as he looked at me. The evidence sat on the table, clear and undeniable, but they were already choosing to believe Cameron's performance over documented facts. "Emma Catherine Morrison," my father said, using my full name in the tone that had terrified me as a child. "I am disgusted by this behavior. Your brother has worked incredibly hard to build his career, and instead of supporting him, you're trying to tear him down with lies. Dad, look at the evidence. The timestamps, the document histories." "Enough," he snapped. "Cameron is a Johns Hopkins graduate completing his medical residency. You're a struggling state school student who clearly can't handle your brother's success. This jealousy and these false accusations end now." My mother nodded, her arm around Cameron's shoulders. "Sweetheart, we love you, but this behavior is unacceptable. Cameron has earned everything through hard work and brilliance. These conspiracy theories need to stop." The extended family shifted uncomfortably, unsure whether to examine the evidence or follow my parents' lead. My grandfather picked up one of the evidence packets, his accounting background making him naturally inclined toward documentation. But my father quickly intervened. "We're not entertaining these delusions," Dad announced. "Emma, you will apologize to Cameron immediately for these false accusations, or we will stop paying your tuition and living expenses. Your education is a privilege we provide, and we won't fund someone who attacks our family with lies." The ultimatum hung in the air like toxic smoke. Cameron watched me with a mixture of triumph and mock concern, already confident in his victory. My parents stood united in their threat, willing to destroy my educational future to protect their golden child's lies. I looked around the table at my extended family, seeing uncertainty in some faces and disappointment in others. The evidence was right there, clear as daylight, but family dynamics and Cameron's manipulation had created a reality where truth mattered less than preserving their image of perfection. "Well," my mother demanded, "we're waiting for your apology." I felt something shift inside me, a crystal-clear moment of understanding. These people would never see Cameron's flaws or acknowledge my worth. I could apologize, submit to their manipulation, and spend the rest of my life in Cameron's shadow. Or I could choose a different path. I smiled, genuinely smiled for the first time in months. "All right," I said simply. Then I walked out of Morton's Steakhouse, leaving them to interpret those 2 words however they wanted. Behind me, I heard Cameron beginning another performance about forgiveness and family healing, confident he had won. My parents were probably already planning how to spin this story to make themselves look like patient, loving parents dealing with a troubled child. But as I drove home and pulled out my laptop, I was planning something entirely different. What my family didn't know as they celebrated Cameron's victory at that steakhouse was that I'd been investigating my brother's academic fraud for 7 months. The metabolic pathways theft wasn't my first discovery, it was simply the final piece of evidence I needed to complete my case. My suspicions began during Thanksgiving when Cameron mentioned casually that his high school science fair project had been referenced in a medical journal. I remembered that project mainly because I'd helped him with the initial research when I was just a freshman. Later, alone in my dorm, I searched for the journal reference and found something disturbing. The methodology Cameron had used was remarkably similar to a paper published by a graduate student at Northwestern University, published 3 weeks before our science fair submission deadline. That discovery sent me down a rabbit hole of investigation that consumed my winter break and countless library hours. I systematically examined every major academic achievement Cameron had claimed since high school, cross-referencing his work with published research, student databases, and online academic repositories. What I found was a pattern of theft spanning 8 years. Cameron hadn't just stolen my work, he was a serial academic plagiarist who had built his entire reputation on other people's research. In high school, he'd copied projects from obscure undergraduate publications. In college, he'd submitted modified versions of international research papers, counting on his professors' unfamiliarity with foreign journals. In medical school, he'd taken collaborative projects and claimed sole credit by systematically excluding his partners from final submissions. Most disturbing was how he accessed the work he stole. Through careful examination of login records I obtained through a friend in ASU's IT department, I discovered that Cameron had been hacking into academic accounts for years. He'd accessed my university system using password information he'd gathered during family visits, downloading my drafts and research notes months before I submitted them officially. But Cameron's fraud extended beyond simple plagiarism. I found evidence that he'd stolen work from his medical school classmates, taking credit for group research projects and publishing papers that included uncredited contributions from other residents. One particularly damaging discovery was a case where Cameron had stolen preliminary research from a fellow resident working on cardiac surgery protocols, then published the work under his own name while his colleague was on medical leave. The scope of Cameron's academic dishonesty was staggering, but what made it truly dangerous was how he'd incorporated stolen research into actual medical treatment protocols. His fellowship at New York Presbyterian was based on research that included falsified data and plagiarized methodologies that were being used to treat real patients. During Christmas Eve night, while my family slept off their dinner, I worked methodically in my room. I organized 8 years of evidence into professional reports, categorizing each instance of fraud with supporting documentation, timestamps, and source materials. I had screenshots of original papers, Cameron's submissions, login records showing his unauthorized access to various accounts, and correspondence proving he'd excluded collaborators from credit. I prepared separate evidence packages for Johns Hopkins School of Medicine's Academic Integrity Board, New York Presbyterian Hospitals Administration, the New York State Medical Board, and the editors of 4 medical journals that had published Cameron's fraudulent research. Each package was customized to the specific institution's concerns, highlighting how Cameron's fraud affected their community and reputation. But my most important preparation had nothing to do with exposing Cameron's crimes. 7 months ago, when I first discovered the pattern of his fraud, I'd realized that confronting him would likely result in my family choosing his side over mine. So I began planning for independence. I'd secretly applied for transfer to Stanford University's molecular biology program, using my original research and legitimate academic achievements to secure not only admission but a full academic scholarship. The application process required submitting my work to independent verification, ensuring Stanford's decision was based on my authentic abilities rather than any potential contamination from Cameron's fraud. To support myself financially, I'd taken a part-time research position with Genentech, contributing to legitimate drug development while earning enough to cover living expenses. I'd been saving every dollar, preparing for the moment when my family's support would be withdrawn. I'd also secured an apartment near Stanford's campus, signing a lease beginning January 2nd. Everything was arranged for my complete separation from my family's financial control and emotional manipulation. As I worked through the night, I felt a mixture of sadness and liberation. Sadness for the family relationships I was about to lose, but liberation from years of living in Cameron's fraudulent shadow. At 3 a.m., I finished preparing all the institutional reports and scheduled them to be automatically sent at 8 a.m. Christmas morning. I wanted my family to understand the consequences of their choices before the institutions began responding. This wasn't revenge. It was justice and self-preservation. I also composed personal emails to my extended family, including the evidence of Cameron's fraud and explaining why I felt compelled to report it. I wanted them to understand this wasn't jealous sibling rivalry, but a serious case of academic fraud that affected real patients and legitimate researchers. As dawn approached, I packed my belongings systematically, taking only items I'd purchased myself or received as gifts from people other than my parents. I left behind anything that represented my family's financial support, wanting to make a clean break from their control. The Stanford acceptance letter sat prominently on my desk next to printed confirmations of my scholarship, my Genentech position, and my apartment lease. I wanted my parents to see that their threats to withdraw support were meaningless because I'd already arranged for my independence. By sunrise, everything was ready. In 2 hours, emails would automatically send to institutions across the country, exposing Cameron's fraud and beginning investigations that would likely end his medical career. My family would discover that their supposedly obedient daughter had been planning her escape for months and was no longer subject to their manipulation. I showered, dressed in business casual attire, and went downstairs to make coffee. In a few hours, my family would wake up to a completely different reality, one where Cameron's golden reputation was revealed as fraud, and where I was no longer willing to sacrifice my truth for their comfort. Cameron stumbled into the kitchen at 7:45, still wearing his pajamas and sporting the satisfied smile of someone who believed he'd successfully manipulated his entire family. He barely glanced at me as he reached for the coffee maker, probably assuming I'd spent the night preparing my apology. "Morning, sis," he said with mock cheerfulness. "Hope you slept well and thought about what we discussed yesterday. Mom and Dad are really looking forward to hearing your apology this morning. Maybe we can put all this unpleasantness behind us and have a nice Christmas after all." I watched him pour coffee into his favorite mug, a Johns Hopkins Medical School commemorative piece our parents had given him for graduation. He moved with the casual confidence of someone who'd never faced real consequences for his actions. "I did think about what we discussed," I replied calmly, checking my phone. 7:58. 2 minutes until the automatic emails began sending. "I thought about it all night, actually." Cameron nodded approvingly, assuming my sleepless night meant I'd been agonizing over his ultimatum. "Good. I know this was hard for you, but family comes first. We need to stick together, especially when outside forces try to create problems between us." Outside forces. He was already rewriting history, transforming his academic fraud into some external threat to family unity. At exactly 8 a.m., my phone buzzed with the first confirmation that my scheduled emails had been sent. Then Cameron's phone buzzed. Then again. And again. His expression shifted from casual confidence to concern as multiple notifications flooded his device. He glanced at the screen, and I watched his face transform as he read the sender information. Johns Hopkins School of Medicine Academic Integrity Office. "What the hell," he muttered, opening the first email. His coffee mug slipped from his hand, shattering against the kitchen tile as he read. The Johns Hopkins logo was clearly visible at the top of the email as his hands began to shake. "Oh God," he whispered, scrolling through the message. "Oh God. Oh God." More notifications continued arriving. New York Presbyterian Hospital Administration. New York State Medical Board. American Journal of Clinical Medicine Editorial Board. Each institution was receiving comprehensive evidence packages documenting 8 years of Cameron's academic fraud. I remained seated at the kitchen table, sipping my coffee and watching my brother's world crumble in real time. He looked up at me with growing horror, finally understanding what my calm "all right" had actually meant. "Emma, what did you do?" he demanded, his voice rising to a near scream. "What did you send them?" Before I could answer, our parents rushed into the kitchen, drawn by the sound of Cameron's distress and the crash of his broken mug. Mom immediately went to Cameron, stepping carefully around the ceramic shards while Dad looked around suspiciously. "What's going on?" Mom asked, wrapping her arms around Cameron as he stared at his phone in shock. "She did it," Cameron said, pointing at me with a trembling finger. "She actually did it. She sent everything to Johns Hopkins, to the hospital, to everyone. They're calling for an emergency investigation. They want me to report to Baltimore immediately." Dad's face darkened as he turned toward me. Emma, what is he talking about? I gestured toward the Stanford acceptance letter on the counter, along with my scholarship documentation and apartment lease. I sent documentation of Cameron's academic fraud to the appropriate institutions. Johns Hopkins, his hospital, the medical licensing board, and the journals that published his stolen research. 7 months of comprehensive evidence showing systematic plagiarism and patient endangerment. Cameron's hands shook as more emails flooded his phone. You can't do this. You have to call them back and tell them it was a mistake, that you made everything up. This is going to destroy everything I've worked for. Everything you stole, I corrected gently. Your career was built on other people's work, Cameron. The only thing being destroyed is the lie you've been living. Mom looked back and forth between us, struggling to process what was happening. Sweetheart, surely this is just a misunderstanding. Cameron wouldn't steal anyone's work. He's brilliant. He's always been brilliant. Mom, look at the evidence, I said, pointing to copies of the documentation I'd left on the counter. Timestamps, login records, side-by-side comparisons of original work and Cameron's submissions. 8 years of systematic academic fraud. Dad picked up the papers, his business background making him naturally inclined toward documentation. As he examined the evidence, his expression gradually shifted from anger to confusion to something approaching horror. Cameron, he said slowly, these dates show that Emma's research was completed months before your publication. And these login records suggest you accessed her university account without authorization. It's all fabricated, Cameron shouted, but his voice lacked conviction. She's tech-savvy. She could have faked all of this to make me look bad. More notifications kept arriving on Cameron's phone. By now, every institution was acknowledging receipt of my evidence packages and announcing preliminary investigations. The New York State Medical Board was requesting an immediate meeting to discuss potential license suspension pending their review. Emma, Mom pleaded, surely you can fix this. Call them back and explain that it was all a misunderstanding, that you were upset and not thinking clearly. I looked at my mother, this woman who had spent my entire life dismissing my achievements and praising Cameron's fraudulent ones. Even now, faced with overwhelming evidence, she was asking me to perpetuate the lie that had defined our family dynamics. I can't fix this, Mom, because it's not broken, I said. Cameron stole research from me, from his classmates, from published papers. He's been committing academic fraud for 8 years, and some of that fraudulent research has been used in medical protocols that affect real patients. Cameron's phone rang, the caller ID showing New York Presbyterian Hospital. He stared at it for a long moment before answering with a shaky voice. Dr. Cameron Morrison speaking. I couldn't hear the other side of the conversation, but I watched Cameron's face grow paler with each word. He answered yes, sir, and I understand several times before hanging up. I'm suspended, he said numbly. Effective immediately. They want me in New York by tomorrow morning for an emergency review. They're launching a full investigation into all my research and patient care protocols. The kitchen fell silent except for the sound of Cameron's phone continuing to buzz with new messages. Each notification represented another institution, another investigation, another piece of his fraudulent empire crumbling. Dad was still examining the evidence, his analytical mind processing the implications. Cameron, if even half of this documentation is accurate, you could face criminal charges for fraud. The medical board could revoke your license permanently. Please tell me you didn't send it, Cameron whispered, looking at me with desperate eyes. Please tell me you can still stop this. I met his gaze steadily. It's already sent. All the institutions are already investigating. Your career as you knew it is over. Cameron's face crumpled as he realized that everything had already been sent, that all the institutions were already investigating, that his career was over. The golden boy who had manipulated our family for decades was finally facing consequences for his actions. Dad's phone started ringing. Mom's phone started ringing. The extended family was beginning to respond to the evidence packages I'd sent them, wanting explanations and expressing shock at Cameron's fraud. Our perfect family Christmas morning had become the day Cameron's house of lies finally collapsed. 6 months later, I stood in Stanford University's Advanced Molecular Biology Laboratory, pipetting solutions for my research into novel enzyme catalysis mechanisms. Through the window, I could see the California hills, a view that reminded me daily of how far I'd traveled from that devastating Christmas morning. My research was progressing better than anyone had anticipated. The enzyme work that Cameron had stolen was now being developed into legitimate therapeutic applications under my name and supervision. 2 pharmaceutical companies had approached Stanford about licensing my discoveries, and I was being fast-tracked into the university's combined MD-PhD program with full funding. The irony wasn't lost on me. Cameron had stolen my work to build a fraudulent career that eventually collapsed, while my authentic research was now opening doors I'd never imagined possible. Truth had a way of rising to the surface, even when temporarily buried under lies. My phone buzzed with a text from my cousin Andrew. Just saw the Science magazine article about your enzyme research. Mom sent it to the whole family. Your mom's finally bragging about you instead of Cameron. Character development. The family dynamics had shifted dramatically over the past months. Initially, my parents had blamed me for Cameron's downfall and their financial crisis. But as the legal proceedings unfolded and the extent of Cameron's fraud became undeniable, they began to understand what I'd tried to tell them. Cameron's criminal trial had been a wake-up call for everyone. The evidence presented in court showed not just academic plagiarism but a calculated pattern of deception that had endangered patients and defrauded institutions. The prosecutor described Cameron as a manipulative individual who had exploited trust at every level, from family relationships to professional responsibilities. He ultimately pleaded guilty to fraud charges and was sentenced to 18 months of probation, community service, and restitution payments. His medical license was permanently revoked, and he was banned from working in any healthcare-related field. Johns Hopkins had agreed to a reduced repayment plan that would take my parents 12 years to complete, but at least they were able to keep their house. Cameron was now working as a pharmaceutical sales representative in Denver, living in a modest apartment and attending court-mandated therapy sessions. According to family reports, he was slowly beginning to acknowledge the harm his fraud had caused, though the process of taking responsibility was difficult and ongoing. The transformation that surprised me most was in my parents. After months of family therapy and difficult conversations, they'd begun to recognize their role in enabling Cameron's behavior. Mom had actually apologized to me in writing, acknowledging years of favoritism and expressing regret for dismissing my achievements while celebrating Cameron's fraudulent ones. Dad had been even more direct in his accountability. During one of our monthly family dinners, which had resumed in April, he looked me in the eye and said, "Emma, I failed you as a father." I was so impressed by Cameron's apparent success that I ignored his character flaws and your genuine accomplishments. "I'm sorry it took a criminal trial for me to see the truth." Those words meant more to me than any praise Cameron had ever received. My phone rang, interrupting my laboratory work. It was Dr. Gregory Hamilton from New York Presbyterian, the doctor who had fired Cameron 6 months earlier. "Emma, I hope you don't mind me calling," he said. "I got your number from the Stanford Research Office. I wanted to personally thank you for your courage in exposing your brother's fraud." I stepped away from my experiments to take the call. "Dr. Hamilton, you don't need to thank me. I just reported academic dishonesty. You did much more than that. Your evidence helped us identify 2 other residents who were collaborating with Cameron on fraudulent research. We've overhauled our entire academic integrity system because of what you revealed. You probably prevented future patient harm by speaking up when you did." He continued, "I also wanted you to know that your reputation in the medical research community is excellent. When you apply for medical school residencies, I'd be happy to provide a recommendation letter. The field needs more people with your integrity." After hanging up, I reflected on how the crisis had actually enhanced rather than damaged my professional prospects. By choosing truth over family loyalty, I demonstrated the kind of character that academic and medical institutions valued. My research supervisor, Dr. Angela Chun, approached my workstation with a smile. "Emma, I just received confirmation that your paper on enzyme catalysis has been accepted for publication in Nature Biochemistry. This is a significant achievement for an undergraduate researcher." The same type of journal that had published Cameron's fraudulent work was now publishing my legitimate research. The irony was poetic, but more importantly, it represented validation that my work stood on its own merit. "There's something else," Dr. Chun continued. "The National Institutes of Health wants to interview you for a profile they're writing about academic integrity and research ethics. Your case has become a teaching example in graduate programs across the country." I had never intended to become a symbol of academic integrity, but I was proud that my experience might help other students find the courage to report fraud when they encountered it. My phone buzzed with another text, this time from Cameron himself. We'd been exchanging occasional messages since his therapy had helped him begin taking responsibility for his actions. Saw the news about your NIH interview. Proud of you for building a real career based on real work. I know I have no right to ask, but thank you for not giving up on the idea that I could eventually become a better person. Therapy is helping me understand how badly I hurt you and everyone else. His messages were still awkward and often self-centered, but they represented genuine progress from the person who had threatened to destroy my life 6 months earlier. I'd learned that forgiveness didn't require reconciliation, but it did require releasing anger that could poison my own future. I texted back, I hope you continue growing and finding ways to contribute positively. Take care of yourself. As I returned to my research, I thought about the life lesson that had emerged from our family's crisis. Enabling toxic behavior ultimately hurts everyone involved, including the person whose bad choices are being protected. By refusing to enable Cameron's fraud, I'd given him the opportunity to face reality and potentially become a better person. My phone rang one more time. It was Mom, calling from Target. Emma, honey, I'm at the store and I saw a magazine article about young women in science. Your research was mentioned as one of the most promising developments in enzyme therapy. I bought 8 copies to send to everyone we know. For the first time in my adult life, my mother was bragging about my real achievements instead of Cameron's fake ones. The family dynamic had fundamentally shifted, creating space for me to be seen and appreciated for who I actually was. Thanks, Mom. That means a lot. Sweetheart, I know I've said this before, but I want to say it again. You were right to report Cameron's fraud, even though it was hard for all of us. You protected patients and upheld principles that matter more than family comfort. I'm proud of you for having the courage I lacked. After we hung up, I stood in my laboratory, surrounded by equipment and research that represented my authentic future. Through the window, the sunset painted the California sky in shades of amber and rose, beautiful and real. I had learned that sometimes protecting the truth requires sacrificing relationships, but paradoxically, insisting on truth often leads to deeper, more honest connections. My family was smaller now, but more genuine. My career prospects were built on solid ground rather than stolen foundations. My self-respect was intact because I'd chosen integrity over approval. Standing in that laboratory, holding my first major research publication acceptance, I understood that the most important victory wasn't Cameron's downfall but my own rise. By refusing to enable fraud, I'd created space for truth to flourish. By choosing justice over comfort, I'd built a foundation for genuine success. The Christmas Eve that had seemed like an ending had actually been a beginning. The moment I said all right to my parents' ultimatum and chose my own path had set in motion events that transformed not just my life but my entire family's understanding of truth, accountability, and authentic achievement. Sometimes the most loving thing you can do is refuse to enable someone's destructive behavior, even when that refusal costs relationships. Sometimes protecting truth matters more than protecting feelings. Sometimes standing up for what's right, even when you're standing alone, is the only path to real freedom. My phone buzzed one final time with a message from Stanford's medical school admissions office. Congratulations. Your application has been accepted with full scholarship for the combined MD-PhD program. Your research excellence and demonstrated integrity make you exactly the kind of physician-scientist our profession needs. I smiled, looking around my laboratory one more time before heading home. Tomorrow, I would continue building a career based on truth, surrounded by people who valued authenticity over appearance. The golden child was gone, but the authentic daughter had finally found her place in the world. Before I finish this story, I want to ask you, have you ever faced a situation where standing up for what's right meant risking important relationships? How did you find the courage to choose integrity over comfort? I'd love to hear your experiences. Thank you for listening to my story and for supporting others who choose truth over convenience. Remember, authentic success built on truth always outshines achievements built on lies.